Hi YouTube, welcome back to my channel, True Crime Revealed. Today's story takes place in the year of 2010 in Conyers, Georgia. It involves murdered single mother Jarmika Nikki Whitehead by the hands of her own evil twin daughters, Jasmiyah and Tasmiyah. The case is a very, very sad one because this woman lost her life at the hands of her two daughters, who she cared for, loved, and took care of for several years, and this was her repayment. So it's a very, very hard case because this is a single mom who basically was trying to give her daughters a life that she thought that they deserved, was loving toward them, and basically was just trying to set some boundaries and rules which these girls did not like. So she lost her life in the process at the hands of her own two daughters who she brought into this world. Today we're going to talk about the events that led up to the particular murder, the day of the murder, and the findings after the murder as well. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. But let's go ahead and get started on the tragic murder of Jarmika Nikki Whitehead.
Today's story is going to be a little bit different because on this channel, traditionally, I've done a lot of videos on murdered and abducted children. But today's story is a little bit of a twist because the children are actually the murderers, specifically twin girls that are murdering their own mother. And so I wanted to do this story today just because it is still the same. It is a crime, even though they are committed by children, and we do have killer kids, as they call them, and today's story, killer twins. But it doesn't make the crimes any less heinous, any less brutal, none of it. It is more creepy in a way because these are minors actually committing murders, and in this case, they are committing matricide, taking the life of a woman who gave them life. So it's definitely got the shocking element, the aspect of surprise, because it's one that's not really expected when you hear about children. You don't really expect them to be associated with murder. So that is going to be what we're going to do today on Killer Twins. Let's get started. Twins. I've always found twins to be absolutely fascinating. When I was younger, I actually wanted to be a twin. I thought that they were so cool to have a sister or a brother that looks exactly like you. And if you grew up in the 90s like me, you remember Lindsay Lohan playing in the movie The Parent Trap. I thought that twins were fascinating and just the coolest thing ever, especially identical twins. I just thought it was the most amazing thing as a kid, and I was actually hoping when I got older and I became a mom, I could actually have twins. So, needless to say, I love twins. From the 90s commercials with the Doublemint twins to movies like Harry Potter that feature twins as a part of the main characters. You've also got Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen. Oh my goodness, I loved growing up watching them. And of course, Tia and Tamara in Sister Sister. So in mainstream culture, we always see these twins as being positive, fun, upbeat, and that's what makes this story so shocking because you've got these twins who were these adorable little girls you see in these pictures who grew up to be essentially monsters. And I think it's sad not only because Nikki lost her life at the hands of these two little monsters that she had for daughters, but because they too had promises of having a wonderful life. They were involved in so many great activities and had aspirations of being a part of society in a positive way, and now their lives too have ultimately been ruined. Jarmika Yvonne Whitehead, also known as Nikki, was born on April 18th, 1975. Her story begins with a little bit of a troubled beginning and past. Her mother, Linda Whitehead, actually gave birth to Nikki while in prison because Linda was serving for drug related charges. So she did have a little bit of a hard beginning, but she did love her daughter just the same. However, it was a bad beginning because she was born in prison, and that kind of set off a chain of events. Now, because of that, Nikki was actually raised by her grandmother growing up, and her grandmother's name is Della Frazier. Now, Della Frazier actually, if you fast forward to the future, is going to actually take care of the twins, Jas and Tas. So she was very instrumental in not only Nikki's upbringing, but also Jas and Tas as well. So Della Frazier was a good woman. She took care of her daughter Linda's child, and then fast forward takes care of Nikki's daughters, Jas and Tas. So Nikki had that start of being born in prison, which was not the easiest, I'm sure, for her mother Linda to deal with. However, she was in school and she tried to do the best that she could with the life that she had. However, she did in turn find herself making a few mistakes growing up. She was really familiar with the boys, if you know what I mean. So she was basically having sex with boys, she was drinking, she was smoking weed, different things like that. And at the age of 17, she found out that she was, in fact, pregnant. So Nikki finds herself pregnant, which I'm sure is a shock. She is a teenager essentially. She's only 17, so she's very young, and she's surprised that she's going to be a mom here at 17. But then she finds out that she's having twins, no less, right? So twins are not super common for people to have, especially a teenager. But Nikki goes ahead. She has her twin girls, and she vows that she wants them to essentially have a better life than she did. Now, the twins spend some time with her, right? But then they also spend some time, a lot of time actually, with their great grandmother, Della Frazier, the same woman that raised Nikki, essentially, is now raising her daughters as well. So remember, she's a young mom. She may need time to get help. She's trying to get things together and just kind of figure things out. So she wasn't with her daughters their entire life. A lot of the time, they were actually spending time with Della Frazier, their grandmother. But she's still present and instrumental as much as she can be. And in the year of 2000, when Nikki is 25, she actually meets her boyfriend at the time. His name is Robert Head, and she decides that they're going to all move to Conyers, Georgia, which is, of course, going to be the final resting place of Nikki when she is ultimately murdered at the hands of these two girls. But growing up, these girls were honor roll students. They were stated to have had all A's, so they were very smart. They participated in things like dance and Girl Scouts. So again, Nikki wanted them to have a better life. She wanted them to be involved in really good activities. And the girls, if they would not have done this, had a very bright future ahead of them. Taz and Jas are living with Della Frazier, as you see pictured here, for upwards of 12 years. They're all living together. And again, Della is a really good woman to allow Jas and Taz to live in her house for several years. And Nikki is very appreciative, but she wants to just kind of go on, move on with her life with her two girls, provide them a good life. So they move out, they go to Conyers. And the girls ultimately have dreams of going to Harvard. Remember, they were straight A students. They were in Girl Scouts, music classes, dance classes, Girl Scouts. They kept busy. And Nikki did that on purpose because she knew when she was younger, she was getting into trouble, meeting up with boys, drinking, trying out different drugs, and ultimately became pregnant at a very young age. And she knows that Taz and Jas have a very, very bright future ahead of them and ultimately have their heads well on their shoulder. So she just wants to make sure that they are able to achieve their dreams and that nothing stands in their way. So she wants to be a good mom, she wants to be supportive, and she wants to ensure that all of their dreams come true as far as going to Harvard and making it. in the real world. But as fate would have it, these two 16-year-old girls did not like the rules. They enjoyed going out. They wanted to go to parties. They wanted to hang out with boys. They wanted to drink and different things like that. Maybe try a little pot here and there. And Nikki is not having any of that. And the girls actually become bitter and they start resenting the mother's discipline. And basically, Nikki is starting to lose control over these girls. She is a single mom. Although she has a boyfriend or a significant other, if you will, who's kind of in and out, she ultimately is responsible and is raising these two girls by herself. And she's basically losing her control over them because these are no longer 5 and 6 year olds anymore. These are big 16-year-old girls who feel like they don't have to listen to anyone, let alone Nikki, who they feel did everything that they wanted to do younger and she's not letting them do it. And she's been having assistance with the great grandmother, who's kind of been the mother figure, if you will. So they don't really respect their mother. They don't. They're very rude, they're very disrespectful. There were many times where Nikki had to actually contact the authorities and 911 because they would get into these scuffles and these arguments. And it just wasn't a good setup and environment for the three of them to be in that house. Things got very, very volatile. And it's basically because the twins did not want to listen to Nikki. They didn't want to listen to their mom. Unfortunately, their biological father was not really involved in their life. And so you need the mother and the father in the household, of course, to be able to parent the best that you can. It's already difficult enough if there's two parents in the home, but especially if you are a single mom trying to raise these two girls on your own. And these girls ultimately take advantage because they don't want to listen to her. They want to do things their way. And that's a lot of teenagers, right? I'm sure a lot of you can remember being a teen and you didn't want to listen to everything that your parents told you. You talked back, you maybe snuck out of the house, you maybe didn't listen to everything they told you to do. But not many people take it as far as Jas and Tas did, to the point of ultimately ending their mother's life. And these girls took it way too far. So we're going to talk about that. So by the time Jas and Tas are in high school, their view on life and their goals begin to shift just a bit. And that is to be expected. Sometimes when you're in elementary and middle school, things are going super well. You're getting all A's. You've got plans on going to Harvard, like these girls do. But once they get to high school, things change a little bit. Their priorities shift. They care probably more about how they look, who their friends are, boys, different things like that. So there's an incident where things start to kind of really boil because Nikki actually took away Taz's cell phone. Because again, their priorities are shifting. They're not really studying like they should. And Taz gets her phone taken away. And these girls don't like this. And basically, Nikki ends up making a phone call to 911 where she is absolutely shaken up and frantic. And she actually discovers that Jas had actually snuck out in the middle of the night one night to meet her boyfriend. And so, you know, they're upset because they were getting their phones taken away. They're sneaking out to see boys. Hormones are flaring. And things are just getting really out of control. And these girls begin to start resenting their mother and just becoming very bitter against her. And to me, in this photo where we see one of the girls with the mother just seems happy, but a little bit tired at the same time, emotionally, maybe. But she loves her daughter, hugged up next to her. And the look on this one girl's face, to me, it's pretty mean. There's an intent behind her eyes where you can tell they were already having some resentment that was kind of building up. And even though she's sitting next to her mother, and I guess they're watching television or just kind of hanging out, whatever is going on in this picture, you can see and just kind of feel by looking at the photo, the look in her eyes is that she's had it. She's tired of being told what to do. And it's sad because Nikki has absolutely no idea that these girls will take it that far. Yes, they've gotten into arguments. Yes, she's had to call 911 because she's discovered they snuck out of the house, but she doesn't really think that these girls will ultimately end her life. Now, Della Frazier, the great grandmother of the twins, states that she had custody for the girls the majority of their lives growing up, and that Nikki ultimately would sometimes try to get custody of them, and then they would grant Nikki custody through the courts, but then Della, the great grandmother, would get custody. And then again, it would kind of be a back and forth thing where Nikki ultimately would get custody again. So on January of 2010, actually January 5th, the courts decided to have Jas and Tas live with their mother Nikki on a 2-week trial period to see how things were going to go. January 5th. Now keep in mind, she's murdered ultimately on January 13th of 2010. And the girls protested several times. They said that they wanted to live back with their great grandmother Della, and I could understand why they might want to for two reasons, in my opinion. The first reason is Della's who they know. She has raised them ultimately most of their lives, where Nikki is just kind of dropping in here and there and out. She was a young mother, so she'd spend some time with them there, and then she'd be off on her own and have the girls with Della, and then she'd come back again. So Della was comfortable. She's who they grew up with, she's who they knew. Also, Della is a great grandmother, so she's a little bit of an older woman, and these girls probably could basically pull the wool, if you will, over Della easier than they could over their mother, Nikki. And that's just to say that sometimes is what some teenage girls do if there's an older mother figure, if you will, or grandmother type that's watching them, they can probably get away with a lot more and sneak out if they want to, as opposed to Nikki, who was trying to maybe keep them in her vision a little bit more and keep them more structured so they couldn't get away with as much. So, needless to say, these girls are not happy that they're having to go, with their mother on this 2-week trial period. So much so, they are willing to commit murder all so that they don't have to live with her. And I guess it just speaks for their quote unquote trust in the system or the courts, if you will, because they've been kind of tossed back and forth from great grandmother to mom, then great grandmother. It was kind of like a ping pong, if you will, game of who was going to get custody between the great grandmother and their mother. And after this 2-week trial period had happened, I guess they just did not want the courts to have to tell them that she was in fact going to be their legal guardian. They're 16 and they don't want that. And they also, of course, already have all of this pent up resentment with their mother, so they didn't really care. They felt like they didn't have anything to lose. Now, on the morning of January 13th, 2010 was a day that started off like any other day. Nikki was waking up to get her day started, and Jas and Tas were supposedly getting up, getting ready to go to school. They supposedly state that they go to school. However, when they return back that afternoon, later that day, they find a very horrific and gruesome discovery. So Jas and Taz return home on the afternoon of January 13th at the Bridle Ridge Walk subdivision. As you can see, their home is pictured here. And the girls are quote unquote beside themselves, they tell police. When they get there, they find a very horrific scene and they see their 34-year-old mother, Nikki, laying in a pool of blood, and she is ultimately deceased. And the girls claim that they are so scared, so upset, so hurt that someone has gone into the home, and claimed the life of their beautiful mother. So they're frantic and they end up contacting the police. So police arrive at the home of Nikki, Taz, and Jas, and they are immediately stunned by what they see and smell. As investigators walk through the door, they are immediately hit with a sweet smell of blood. There was so much blood all over the home. It was a gruesome crime scene. You can see that there was a struggle, blood stains all over the carpet. You can see where the person was dragged or was either dragging themselves across the carpet. Very, very violent. There's blood spatter on the walls, the carpets. Just a very, very gruesome scene with blood essentially everywhere. And you can tell that Nikki struggled. However, she also put up a good fight. So she did try her very best to get these little monsters off of her. However, in the end, she of course lost the struggle, but she was able to leave some DNA evidence that we're going to discuss here in just a few, so that ultimately they were actually found out. So they can lie and pretend and hide for just as much time as they try to, but in the end, they're ultimately found out, of course. And we're going to talk about the DNA evidence that she left behind. But as you guys can see, this scene is just horrific. Blood stains everywhere. And a lot of the investigators stated it was one of the most gruesome scenes they had ever seen. Nikki is ultimately found in the tub that is stained with blood, and this is ultimately where she is dragged and her body is left to be found essentially. So it's a very horrific and gory scene. As you can see here in this particular photo, blood everywhere. You can see a handprint, and it's just really a gruesome and very brutal way that someone can die, especially at the hands of your own daughters. So, police state that Nikki was actually stabbed 80 times with a kitchen knife, and she was stabbed so many times that her spinal cord was nearly severed. Take that in, guys. Her spinal cord was nearly severed. She was stabbed 80 times with a kitchen knife. That is how much rage Jas and Tas had against their mother. That is how much hate they had for her. They wanted her dead and they were not going to stop stabbing her until they succeeded, and they did. And it was so brutal that the woman's own spinal cord was nearly severed. So police know right off the bat this is a crime of passion, and Nikki most likely knew exactly who her murderer was. They, however, did not know just yet that these two little monsters, these demons, were the ones that were actually behind their own mother's murder. So, of course, Jas and Tas don't want to implicate themselves in the murder, and they want to make it seem like there's some type of a love triangle going on. So, they tell the investigators that Nikki lived with Robert, her one boyfriend, but then she also had a boyfriend named Joe. And so they're thinking that possibly there's a love triangle that's going on. They are, however, able to quickly find out that through DNA testing of Robert, he's actually cleared and has no implication of the murder whatsoever. They are also able to go ahead and clear Joe as well. And so they basically aren't going to be able to use them as a scapegoat. Investigators also are able to determine that the girl's biological father have a really solid alibi because he was actually living in Canada at the time of the murder. So again, police are not really suspecting these two girls as prime suspects. They are seemingly looking like nice twin girls that would not do anything heinous like this, especially to their own mother. Of course not, right? Who does that kind of stuff? They're not really thinking that they're the prime suspect, so they have to go in and basically clear all of the love interests that were in Nikki's life out. This is including ex-husbands, former boyfriends, current boyfriends, the whole nine, and they are finally able to rule that none of them had anything to do with this. Investigators noticed something strange on the drive for the twins going to be interrogated at the station, and they actually noticed that there is a bite mark on one of the twins' arms. And one of the investigators asked, "Hey, what's that on your arm? Why do you have something, a bite mark on your arm?" And she just begins to lie, very, very conniving and deceitful. She tells him that that's just something that she does to herself when she gets upset. And so when they get actually to the station and they're being interrogated, the two girls are actually hugging each other with their arms, and one of the detectives says, "What can I do to make this easier for you?" And then they turned back and they looked at him and they said, "Can we watch CSI?" And one of the detectives says immediately the hairs on his neck stand up and he just feels very, very creeped out and notices that something is very wrong. There's also something that happens as well when they're at the station. In addition to this, the girls have no empathy at all. Your mother has just been viciously murdered, stabbed brutally. You found her like that. No one told you this. You went back into the home and you discovered that your mother has been brutally stabbed to death several times, and they were not even empathetic at all. It just seemed like they didn't care. They did a lot of pretend crying, if you will, at one point when they were in the room, but it was tearless crying, very tearless. And when he would ask them to describe their mother, they were very, very insulting and they didn't have anything good to say about her at all. And again, investigators find this extremely odd because you would think that these 16-year-olds who supposedly love their mother and are upset that she's passed now would have something good to say, but they didn't. In fact, it was the opposite, and they were degrading her and insulting her. Investigators also noticed during the interview that the twins were still wearing gloves, and once removed, they actually asked about a scratch that they saw that they had, and they just said, "Oh, we got into a fight," basically. And so they're still just covering for each other like twins normally would do, right? If they got in trouble at home for something, or maybe you're covering because your twin sister's out on a date. But no, these girls cover each other basically for murder up until the very end. Jas and Taz's story is slowly starting to unravel. It actually unravels further when one of the detectives returns back to Nikki's house. He goes into Taz's room and he finds a bloody boot as well as a wrapped up napkin that has a female's hair basically wrapped in it, tucked into the shoe. So they're realizing that what these twins are telling them is not truthful, that they didn't just happen to stumble across their mother's dead body and not have anything to do with it. Now, in between their tearless crying, the twins had actually told investigators that they had walked to the bus stop that morning to go to school just like they would on any other day. However, thanks to surveillance footage, that great CT footage that we've talked about in other videos as well, this is ultimately what they are able to find, that they were actually lying and they actually hitched a ride from a stranger that day. So they never took the bus, they hitched a ride from the stranger, and with the surveillance footage, it actually showed at the high school that the twins were in the hallway hours after they told the police that they had arrived to school. So these two findings ultimately kill the twins' alibi. Now, back at the home, when investigators are looking at blood, they see that a lot of the blood of the twins, they can't really decipher between the two of them because they have the same DNA. But they are able to decipher that the bite marks on one of the twins' arms are, in fact, of Nikki. They're from her teeth. They actually get dental records and they were able to figure that out. And so they know in this struggle Nikki did fight. They also found that there was hair found between Nikki's teeth. So she was also basically using her teeth to pull on one of the twins' hair to basically to get out of a locked chokehold that they basically had her in when they were ultimately fighting her and stabbing her. She tried her damnedest to get these girls off of her. She really did. So investigators actually wait until the last day of school once they have gathered enough evidence against the twins to go ahead and arrest them on charges of the murder of their mother, Nikki Whitehead. So they get Taz from the house and arrest her, and then they go to the school to arrest Jas. The twins are then charged with felony murder as well as aggravated assault for the death of Nikki. So police really aren't sure of a specific motive of the girls, and because they're so close, they're stronger together being twins, they're extremely close. So a lot of times what they would have to do is they would have to separate them and put them in two different interrogation rooms, basically just to break them down and ultimately get more answers, because together they're like a front. They're like a storm front where you cannot get through to them. But separated, they were basically able to get more information and ultimately a confession. So basically, 4 years after they were awaiting trial, the twins actually finally come forward and they tell the story of what happened, and it is absolutely shocking. They actually confess to the brutal murder and attack of their mother on tape. So the twins admit to investigators that on the morning of January 13th in 2010, they were actually awakened by their mother, and they were actually up to about 2 or 3 in the morning, so they were very tired and they didn't want to get up to go to school. But their mother woke up, told them that they needed to go to school, and this is basically what sparked the attack. There was essentially a fight, and that is basically when they started basically killing their mother. They then cleaned it up and then went to school so that they would have an alibi. Investigators also found that there was a journal where the girls would actually write back and forth to each other letters about how much they hated their mother, how much they disliked her, how they had to get rid of her, and if they didn't do it soon, they weren't going to be able to. So there was a lot of resentment and hate, and it was actually a premeditated crime because they had actually decided prior that they were going to actually act out on this, and they just decided the day of January 13th that that was going to be the day that they were going to actually do it, because I guess they had had it. They had also been writing to different acquaintances, as you can see here in this specific letter, where she's stating that she loves this guy, but she's just very sad, unhappy, and depressed, and she hates living with her mother, and she's just ready to go somewhere else and no longer live there anymore. So they were not only writing letters between each other, the twins, but one of the twins went as far as to actually telling an acquaintance as well how much she hated being with her mother. Detectives also saw that there was a blood path that basically led to outside of the home, which suggested that Nikki was actually trying to run outside to get away. However, the girls actually drug her back into the house to finish her off during the attack. And so this woman was literally running for her life away from these girls, but they drug her back to finish off what they had started. When they were back in the house, the twins actually took a pot and they smashed it over their mother's head. They then grabbed a kitchen knife and they began stabbing her, remember, 80 times. They also choked her with a ribbon medal. And then they went and they dragged her body into the tub where they then left her there to die. And so in one of the confessions that they had of the recording, Jas was actually asked by an investigator what Nikki did was she when she was in the tub, and she said that Nikki said, "Kill me now or I'll kill y'all." And the detective asked, "Well, what happened after that?" And she stated she just kind of went under a couple of times, and ultimately that was it, and she just basically died after that. I mean, how sad is that for your mother to say to you, "Kill me or I'm gonna kill y'all," because you've taken it that far. You've basically stabbed her up, broken a pot over her head, choked her, and left her in a tub to die. And she says, "Finish me off, because if you don't, I'm going to kill you," out of self defense. Do you understand how hurtful that must have been for her to say that in her last moments, to say that to her twin girls that she loved, that she gave birth to, that she wanted to have a better life? Kill me or I'm going to kill y'all. Because they had gone that far, and she was basically dying in her last moments, and she could not believe it. She was hurt, she was shocked, she was filled with rage, but more than anything, she was brokenhearted that she knew that she was about to die at the hands of her girls. And she said, if it's me or you might as well kill me, because if I had the opportunity, I would try to kill you to defend myself, but I can't. And that was one of the things that stuck out to me, one of the most in this case, is the hurtfulness that she must have felt knowing that they had killed her. Now, investigators initially thought that Jas and Tas only admitted to the murder and confessed because they had been coached by attorneys, stating that if they did do this, they could possibly get less time and different things like that. Initially, both of the girls actually pleaded not guilty, but after speaking with attorneys and some years had gone by, they actually did, in fact, plead guilty. And both of the girls were actually sentenced to 30 years in prison. So these girls will be in their 40s when they can get out of prison. So 30 years essentially for taking their mother's life who gave them life. You guys let me know in the comments if you think that justice was in fact served. I understand that they are minors, but like I said, it's going to be 30 years that they're going to be in prison and they can get out when they're in their 40s. What I also found was very interesting is that despite these girls being so close, they're actually placed in two different prisons within the Georgia state prison system for the Department of Corrections. So these girls are not going to have each other to lean on and depend on. They were actually placed in separate prisons, which I think is wonderful. I think that's more of a better punishment, them not being able to be codependent on each other after what they've done. So to me, that is a wonderful punishment in itself that they've been placed in two separate prisons. But Nikki was actually laid to rest, and she was just a beautiful person inside and out. She loved her daughters. She was trying to give them a better life, and she wanted them to not make the mistakes that she did. And unfortunately, because of that, it cost her her life. She is mourned and survived by her family and friends, her mother, Linda. She's also survived by her grandmother, Della. Della loves her granddaughters still, and she tells a lot of people that interview her that she doesn't really believe that their entire story is told and that there was a lot left out, but that she still loves her granddaughters. She does not, of course, condone what they did, but she just hopes that they lead positive lives and are able to make a difference in their lives whenever they are out of prison. It's very difficult for Della to basically fathom what's happened because she raised Nikki. This was her grandbaby that her daughter Linda couldn't really take care of because she was in prison at the time. And then Nikki goes and has her daughters that she really isn't able to take care of in the beginnings of their lives. And Della takes care of those great granddaughters. So it's hard for her because she's lost both of them essentially. Nikki has been murdered, and then she's lost the great granddaughters because they are the reason that Nikki is dead and they're put behind bars. So I could understand why she would want them to live positive and productive lives despite what's happened, because ultimately they are her legacy. Well, I think that Della is proud of Jasmiyah. She actually did graduate from high school. They have a program in the prison where they allow the inmates to actually do this program. And she was actually valedictorian in that specific class that they had there. So I believe that Della is proud that Jasmiyah, despite this awful situation and being in prison, was at least able to get her diploma and was the valedictorian in that specific class. So that's the story, guys. Today, Killer Twins, the gruesome murder of Nikki Whitehead. I'd love to know what you guys thought about this story. If you want to leave me a comment about this one, it's a pretty heavy one because these twin girls actually commit matricide and kill their own mother who loved and brought them into this world. So it's a pretty heavy one. It's one that's always kind of stuck out to me because it's unbelievable. You could could never fathom most people doing something like that to anyone, let alone your own parents or your mother. So, definitely would love to hear you guys' comments about this particular case. As usual, I really appreciate the subscribers. I really appreciate everyone who's been liking and subscribing. It means a lot to me. I enjoy putting together these cases and basically telling the victim stories, and I would love to keep doing that. So if you like this video today, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye now.